And it didn't help that fireplaces weren't invented until later in the Middle Ages.
What?
Shadowverse.
Before we begin, do you know I have a brand new YouTube channel called The Shadlands? But what is The Shadlands, I hear you asking? Well, if you love the Shadowversity content, you will love the Shadlands content because it's basically the same, except it is made to cut to the chase and straight to the point. With recuts of older videos that you've probably never seen before, made to be shorter and easier to consume, as well as brand new exclusive content that you will not find on the Shadowversity YouTube channel. All made in the focus of this new channel, easier to consume content, because even though I love the detail and deep dives that we do here on Shadowversity, some people just don't have the time to watch such long videos. So check out the Shadlands to catch classic Shadowversity content made easier to consume, as well as brand new exclusive content where we cut to the chase and get straight to the point. Greetings, I'm Shad, and a viewer of mine brought to my attention what might be one of the worst misinformed castle-related videos I have ever seen. Before we begin, I do want to add the caveat that I do not think people who make videos like this should be stopped or shamed or anything like that. There's a lot of misinformation that people can actually fall into by accident. There's a lot out there. They think they're doing good by sharing facts about, history, medieval life, castles and stuff. And they can be misled, unfortunately, to no, fault of their own. That can happen. And also, the existence of videos like this gives opportunity for you to find my content and other people's content who are in a position to correct it. And so I actually think it can serve a even better benefit for people wanting to learn about this stuff, because by learning the incorrect thing, that often can lead people to learn the correct thing where they might not have ever learned the correct thing if they hadn't first been misinformed to begin with, okay? Oftentimes the path to truth is traveling through untruth and being misled. So let us begin.
What was life like in a medieval castle?
I just have to comment, this is seems like an AI-generated voice. This is a common voice that you hear in a lot of videos. And people are sometimes saying that there's all this type of AI content that's flooding the platform is really bad. I'm a proponent of AI art, and I think creators can use AI, tools to enhance their own work and stuff. And to me, this is neither positive or negative that it's made by AI. I've seen pretty bad videos that were voiced by humans and things. I wonder if it was written by AI, because could that be the source of where all this misinformation is coming from? Because if the AI was trained off of what's mostly available online, and then you ask an AI about facts of medieval castles, most likely you'll get a lot of things wrong. And that's one of the things that people have found with a lot of large language models. I wasn't intending this video to be an AI video, by the way. This is just a really bad castle video, even though I am very passionate about AI art. Okay, one of the things I've found with AI large language models is that they can actually be misinformed about the information they provide. And so an AI large language model is not actually a good source to get correct information about specific things sometimes. It can be really good with code and other stuff, but it can only be good as the information it's trained off of. And if it was trained off of a lot of the just offhand comments people make about castles, this might be the sludge that it spits out as a result.
On average, around about 100 people would stay in a castle.
Like, where the heck did it get that information from? Like, what? No, that wasn't the case. On average, 100 people? Most medieval castles were small. I have a recent video on Shadowversity talking about a lot of misconceptions of medieval castles. By the way, this is adding more misconceptions to that list. But one of the misconceptions is that all castles were big. And I got to show a great castle at Tretower Court and Castle in Britain. And one of the great things is more representative of what most castles are like. Single grand tower, centralized keep, with maybe 5 stories on all. So that castle, if you were to include the external kind of buildings that, hugged the bailey, maybe 20 people, most, okay? The castle mostly served a single household. Granted, you could have entire families sometimes living in single rooms. That was more common for the medieval period. So you could push it for a small castle to reach maybe up to 50. But that's a lot of people fitting into what the more standard size of castles were in the medieval period. Most castles were actually on the small end, and as a result, fitting 100 people in Not a chance. So the fact that this video is saying, oh yeah, the average population of a castle, 100 people, maybe for the largest of castles, and even then, 100 people, including servants and everything like that, yeah, you could probably fit, 100 people in at Carnarvon, carefully. But those are the exceptional larger castles. And so it's more nuanced factual information like this that you don't find online, and I think an AI even trained off of this stuff would get really wrong. And so 100 people, that is just wild that I would say that.
At a time. This mainly consisted of servants who were required to maintain day-to-day operation.
The most of the population of a castle was servants. Not necessarily. This is why it's really bad speaking in such broad terms, where it's always this. There might be cases where there were more servants than other people, but the castle population would be comprised out of the family living there. And then the next, I would say the next like larger population outside of the family, and probably the family was probably even less than this group of people, would be the soldiers, the man-at-arms. The castle is a military building, all right? And so you'd have a barracks and soldiers manning the walls, and that would usually comprise probably the largest group of people, and the servants would be even less than that. And the servants, depending on how large the family is, because the family is not usually just a single family. If it's a small castle, yeah, predominantly a single family, but there would be relatives that might have their spouses and children, and if you had room, you could fit them in. It'd be harder to fit it in smaller castles. This is why you have certain noble families, right, move outside of their castles into a manor house or a fortified manor house because the castle wasn't big enough. It's exactly what we saw at Tretower Castle and Court. And so when you had additional family members, that would be the option. But even then, when you have like just direct family relatives living in the castle, you could probably, or only reaching about maybe 10 to 20 family members, and they could be served by, if it's a family of 10, they could easily be served by 5 servants. To equal amount to equal people there, not necessarily. You don't need a servant for every single person. Depends how wealthy the family is, of course. And I'm not saying that it will always be a lower group of servants. I'm saying it depends. Obviously, would have been cases where there was a very high number of servants to the family living there, but usually you'd have more men-at-arms and soldiers. But to say it was always mostly comprised of just the servants in the castle, and that's how they reached the average of 100 people living in the castle, no, that's flat out incorrect.
The castle itself would smell horrible.
Oh, wow, I hate comments like this. Like, I would ask a question. Did medieval people have noses? Did they? Of course they did! What do noses? They smell, and there are certain odors that people find offensive. So the whole thing is that medieval people never bathed and they were okay with horrid smells and like a castle would smell horrible. It's nonsense, all right? No, there were times where they would actually have certain herbs and scents in to either mask bad smells or just to give a good smell. You know one of the things that they had? They had rose water oftentimes, not all the times, but when washing their hands, they would often make it to be rose water because it would smell nice. Why? They had noses and they liked nice smelling things, which meant they would also be offended by bad smelling things. Shock, horror, all right? And also, there is a lot of like medieval art showing people bathing, all right? The whole non-bathing thing oftentimes come from more exceptional, more narrow circumstances, like if a city was dealing with the plague and people were getting quarantined. There were some beliefs that bathing would spread disease because it either opened up the pores or something like that and you could catch disease easier. And so people would bathe less in those situations. And so what happens is people find more exceptional, smaller circumstances of a certain practice happening, like, oh, people bathe less. And they apply it universally across an entire historical period that covers 500 years. Not only that, a huge geographical area. Everyone in medieval Europe, right, very large area, suddenly is not bathing and they didn't mind horrible smells. It's nonsense. Like, basic common sense can actually debunk most of this. It's like, and so I would pose the question, right? Do people like living in horribly smelling things? No, of course they don't. And so why would people accept castles that just smelt horrible all the time? It is just bonkers. It's silly. It's a silly assertion. Now, not to say there wouldn't be areas in the castle that might have more offensive smells, like the cesspit, but even the toilets, the garderobes is what they were called, right? Oftentimes would fall right into the moat, okay? That's the whole purpose of a toilet, is to have a place where you could throw away the waste of the human body outside of the castle, because they didn't want the smell in the castle. Do you think they never cleaned them? Humans are humans. They don't like bad smells. We find the smell of feces and excrement offensive. So the fact that they would just be, we'll piss in a corner, right? And just throw some straw over it to soak it up. And then they just sat in disgust and horrible scents and smells is bulldust. Nonsense. And so stuff like this, but it continually gets propagated. This is not an old video, it's a more recent one.
This is because flushable toilets weren't invented.
Because flushable toilets weren't invented, castles would smell horrible, right? And they're showing one type of possible garderobe that would fall into the cesspit, right? If the cesspit was closed off, just like, have a bit of wood that sits over the hole, the smell doesn't get out, okay? And even if there was a small scent, it would only be localized, right? And of course, cesspits were cleaned out. And a lot of castles had garderobes that just fell right onto the outside of the moat of the castle, so the smell wouldn't stick around. And then also, you could just clean out the cesspits, right? But to assume that because it wasn't flushable and it fell into like either a hole or something outside, that would stink out the entire castle, again, nonsense.
At the time, meaning waste would collect at a giant cesspit at the bottom of the building.
Or just outside. But would that stink out again, the purpose of a garderobe toilet is to get the waste out of the castle so the smell wouldn't be in it.
On top of that, most people were unable to afford a bath.
Most people were unable to afford a bath. This is an interesting one. I thought they were going to go in the direction of most people didn't bathe. He takes an additional step. They just couldn't afford a bath. Afford a bath. Okay. We're not talking about like some copper cast metal, like even the image they're showing you. What are they having a bath in? Like a barrel. Like medieval baths were basically, like a lot of them, made out of wood. And guess what? Peasants, they could get their hands on barrels. They were a common utility item throughout the entire medieval period, right? And not only that, okay? You don't even necessarily need a barrel, so I'll just call them baths, because the baths of medieval period are basically like these barrel things. You don't even need a bath like that to bathe in. They had rivers, right? They had bodies of water. Funnily enough, we also have medieval art of people bathing in bodies of water, as well as, of course, baths. And they also had bath houses. But the idea that most medieval people just couldn't even afford it, this is silly nonsense. It's like, most medieval peasants, not only could they afford it, they could probably make their own. And if not, just have a jug, pour it over themselves, clean themselves off with water. I think this was a foreign thing to people of the past. They think people of the past were just so much more stupid than us. In actual fact, they were probably even smarter. They had not only likely, it is guaranteed, they had vastly more practical skills to provide for themselves, making food, making shelter, cleaning themselves, stuff like that, than probably we do in the modern day. We rely on so many conveniences that make us less independent in the modern day than what they had in the past.
In summer, the smell in a castle would become almost unbearable.
What a nonsense thing. Again, it's going off the thing, they barely bathe, or they couldn't have the money to bathe. By the way, people in a castle, that would indicate them being rather wealthy, yet they're saying most medieval people didn't have the money to afford a bath. Yet they're saying that also answered why some of the smells are bad in a castle that was occupied by people with a lot of money, according to their own standard, who would then have money to either build or buy a bath, which you don't need a lot of money to do anyway. But even their own logic is defeated. This is how silly this video is. Truly an almighty piece of junk, this video. And then in the summer, it would be almost unbearable. If it was almost unbearable, like really, just can they think about this stuff? If it was almost unbearable, do you think they would do nothing about it? They would just laugh. It's almost unbearable that I want to really move out of this castle, this big, elaborate, fancy, rich home that I have in, but I'm so incompetent and stupid that I won't do anything about the smell. I'll just have to live with it. It's like...
The castle would also be very dark and extremely cold.
Gosh, there's a common one that comes up. It's like, no, I mean, there are rooms that would be very dark that didn't have windows, but castles had windows. I think they might mention that all the windows were arrow slits. That's false. A lot of castles, I got to see a lot of them in person, right, where they could get provision for a larger window in an area that wouldn't be a defensive vulnerability. They would have large windows. If the window could be facing the inside of the bailey, man, I mean, at Caerphilly, they got these two big, beautiful windows on the forward-facing gatehouse, right? But also on Carnarvon Castle, that has big windows higher up, so no one can just easily reach and climb through. But those windows were kind of on the outside of the castle, yet it was also facing the city that was attached to it. So Carnarvon is actually a citadel. Citadel means a castle that's attached to a city, and it has a wall around a township next to it, or city, and some of those windows that are on the higher up levels from Carnarvon is facing the township, which still has a defensive wall, so it's technically facing the inside of the bailey as well. But if you were just to class it at the castle by itself without the external city wall, because if those city walls were breached, you know, that these are the walls that will be facing on Carnarvon Castle, those windows are facing the outside of the castle in that technical sense, but they're so high up, they're very hard to reach. And so, of course, castles did have windows to let in light. It's not to say there wouldn't be less light in the rooms that only had arrow slits. Yes, it would be less, but then they'd use candles. That's what happens when it's dark. Candles, fireplaces. We'll get to the fireplaces because that addresses the cold thing. But addressing the light thing, it's like, what do you think people are going to do if there's not enough light? They'll just live in the dark? Castles are always dark. No, then they would have candles, okay? To provide light, sconces and all those things. And that's only when there was not enough provision from the outside light from windows. And there are many castles with many windows providing light. So this whole thing, they're always dark, nonsense. Now there's the cold thing. This cold thing comes up a lot. Stone has is it called thermal mass? A pretty high thermal mass, which means it's not a good insulator, but it can store a lot of heat once heated up. And so it would get a while to get going, but basically, once you heated up the internal castle, it could retain that heat for a bit longer, all right? How did they do it? Fireplaces. One of the very common things, we think of homes today, and a lot of homes that have fireplace, only one fireplace, because it's a good insulation, and that fireplace can sometimes provide heat for most of the house. Not so with castles. So what they did? More fireplaces. Individual rooms with individual fireplaces to heat that individual room. And I got to see in person so many rooms, tower rooms, side rooms, everything, fireplaces all around. In the non-habitable rooms that were just there for storage or something like that, no fireplaces, but so many more fireplaces than you might expect, because in any room that they wanted any level of habitation, yeah, they would want to be warm. And the winters could get pretty cold sometimes, especially in Britain. So how'd they fix that? Fireplaces. Again, they're saying castles are always cold. It's like, really, if people are just living and they're freezing, do they think they'll just freeze to death, or would they do something to solve the issue? This whole video seems to be like there are all these problems that medieval people were so dumb that they just lived in this horrible state and did nothing about it. Nonsense. If there were issues, they would do things to fix it. And yeah, because stone isn't a great insulator, add fireplaces, problem solved. That's right, very warm and cozy in a lot of instances.
Early castles had small windows for defensive purposes, but this just made it dark.
You would be surprised how much light those small windows actually let in. I was there. Sometimes, your eyes adjust, right? And so in a more dark environment, your eyes actually adjust to be more sensitive to light, and even those small windows can actually light up functionally enough, well enough, entire rooms, all right? Of course, larger windows, even better. But to say all castles had these small windows, and there's actually a lot of castles which had much bigger windows to let in more light, and even then, these type of windows let in more light than especially what they're showing in this short.
And hard to see in, and it didn't help that fireplaces weren't invented until later in the Middle Ages.
What? Hang on. Fireplaces were not invented until the late Middle Ages. What the heck? Now, I think they're going to be going off the fact that in some instances, there was a centralized fireplace that would, just let the smoke seep out of other openings and holes. And that's more represented like Viking longhouses and thatched cottages in some instances. But to think that fireplaces were not invented, oh my gosh. Of course fireplaces were invented. They were invented all the way back in Roman times and before. Many people just didn't know what a fireplace was. Some of the oldest castles that I saw have built-in fireplaces. This one's wild. I have no idea where they're getting that. That fireplaces were not invented until the late medieval. That one is wild.
So people would use open fires, which didn't spread heat very well.
So because there were open fires in the early Middle Ages, and also just other places as well, they'd take the assumption that, that's because fireplaces weren't invented. No, sometimes there's actually utility in having a centralized fireplace. And they say it didn't spread heat very well. The reason why you'd have a centralized fireplace is to spread heat more uniformly in an environment. It spreads heat better. Literally the opposite of what they're saying here. And then, so what we can see, like centralized fireplace, like I said, Viking longhouses as well as like round, thatched houses and stuff like that. The smoke actually can seep through the thatch pretty easily, and so it doesn't necessarily need a dedicated chimney to funnel the fire out.
And would cause a room to fill up with smoke.
If the smoke was so bad that people could barely breathe and fill up, right? The whole kind of tone and message of this video is that medieval people are dumb. There were really bad things that happened, and they were so stupid they did nothing about it and they just had to live with it, and wasn't it horrible to live in a medieval castle at the time? No, if it was so bad that the smoke was filling up, they would do something about it. People aren't dumb. And of course, they figured out things to solve issues like this.
Disease was common in the place because the servants couldn't afford medicine.
The medicine of the medieval period was just poor. I have a video actually on that. Criminally underviewed in my opinion, as I can link it, but talking about medieval medicine, and it is wild, some of the things they believed. Yet at the same time, there are some things that worked really well, like their herbology was actually pretty good. And there were some medicinal practices that were functionally valid and did work. Some were completely off, like the whole theory of the four humours. They believe that the body had four different types of conditions or liquids in them. And there was like phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and I forget the fourth one. Blood, sorry. Yeah, there we go. Phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and blood, I think were the four humours. And they felt they had to be in balance, and they came up with these wacky theories. Yet what's funny, even though they're wacky, there is a logical through line that they used in that. And so they were trying to apply logic in their understanding of the human body. They were just getting a lot of things wrong. But saying they got everything wrong, nonsense. And to say a lot of these medicinal treatments, especially the herbology, just couldn't be afforded by the common person, nonsense. A lot of these are natural herbs that everybody had access to, okay? Not a problem. Then there were the wacky ones that probably did require, a bit more money or a specialist, even though you'd be better served by not hiring some of those physicians that had the more wacky techniques and everything like that. And as a result, the rich people that were hiring these physicians probably would get worse, where the poor people that were just self-medicating or going off common herbology knowledge and stuff like that were probably medicating themselves better and other things. But disease, look, this is variable because I think they're taking the things like the Black Death and then applying it too broadly, that disease was always, a problem in the medieval period. No. There were times when disease wasn't rampant, okay? But then the times that there were, and they're latching onto those, applying it too broadly.
So they would have to rely on home remedies or pray to God the illness would go away.
Pray to God the illness would go away. By the way, medieval nobility would pray for illnesses to go away. This wasn't just restricted to the poor. And relying on home remedies. Like I said, sometimes those home remedies are probably better than the physician techniques and other things. But also, the physicians would also use the home remedies, especially the ones that they observed working. And the short cuts off then. So not only does this seem like an AI-made short, actually, it also seems like a really cheap, lazy one where they're cutting it out of a larger video, just cutting things off. I don't know where the origin video is to this short now. I might have to look up the YouTube channel this comes from. So this short comes from One Kia History seems like a very stock standard one that they make, and this was one of their shorts, and it looks like a mostly short channel. So it doesn't seem like this one comes from a larger history video, because what I thought it might have been one of their larger videos that they cut down into a short, because it cuts off abruptly and ends with, you know, you just have to pray to be healed. And so I don't know if it comes from a larger one, but that short was hyper-condensed nonsense. Complete, useless. I think everything they said was wrong in it, all right? There you go. And it looks like there's some life in a medieval city. Why do castles have narrow staircases? I have a feeling they're perpetuating one that I've addressed in my recent castle video about common misconceptions about castles all spiral clockwise. And they're saying narrow is probably, they're spouting the misinformation that it was for a defensive feature, which is false. Check out the previous video there. But all right, I'll leave this one here because, that short had such condensed nonsense in it. It was amazing. And some I had never heard before. That just fireplaces weren't invented in the early medieval period. So people just allowed themselves to get smoked out because they were idiots. Amazing, right? But there you go. There is still a lot of misinformation about castles, and not to worry, I'm doing my best to try and correct it, share some good information, and you can check out the previous castle video. Not only that, that one a lot of people have seen. Why don't you check out the one where I explore Koch Castle's inside. Koch, I get, but I explore the inside of the castle, and they're criminally underviewed because that one has some amazing stuff. You can learn a lot about the inside of a castle as I explore the inside of Castle Koch. Check it out. Hope to see you there. Until then, farewell.